At your command.
A base building is being damaged. Your base is under attack.
Give me orders. On station. Something is moving out there. 6. As you order. As you command. On station.
As you order.
Enemy
On station.
Alright. Well, ignoring all that, welcome everyone to this week's Developer Cepheus Protocol weekly roll-up. And obviously we've got Robert and I here. So, kicking it off, we've got threading. So how's the threading been going so far?
Okay, so essentially, over last weekend, we noticed that there were quite a few performance issues that we were running into. The people were reporting. Um, we were able to basically earmark certain sections of the game that we could apply threading to. There's a couple of other areas that we still need to. For those that don't know, threading is basically the idea that you're basically like separating it onto different cores, is my understanding, and you're basically just kind of assigning resources to that core for like mathematical calculations or whatever. So we threaded a lot of systems because essentially we have a perception component. A perception component is incredibly expensive because it allows buildings, people, helicopters to hear and see each other. So then that way, the fog of war knows the update. Or let's say, for instance, when you see someone, they know to shoot someone. Or if they hear someone, they know to turn around and look. So because of that, it was a whole like number of things that we kind of going into in terms of basically the spine throwers, which are basically like those little defensive infection pods, were ballooning above the safety limit somehow. We fixed that. And then B, combined with those spine throwers being ballooned, and then they can all hear and see because they're looking for targets, we wrote a threaded system that basically goes through, looks at all the spine throwers, and turns them off when Cirque is nowhere nearby. So the idea would be is that there's no way the Cirque will ever have a presence on the entire map at all times. So we're like, okay, Cirque has units here. They have scout helicopters here. They have some units here. Let's do a series of threaded checks every couple of milliseconds, and let's check to see if we should turn off these guys, turn off them, so that way we can redirect performance back to where the actual battlefronts are going on, like where resources are actually required. That's why when you load it up, I think it was last Saturday, Monday, somewhere around there, when you loaded up your same files, in some cases, people were getting like double to 3 times their performance, and things were a lot more stable. So that was one thing that we were able to get around the threading. There are some other things that we want to find some time to thread, which would be the mini-map calculations, and then virtual unit movers. That's just basically doing distance checks and figuring it out. Because we have a system behind the scenes where like it does like civilization type auto-resolving. But for the civilians, for the infected, for the dynamic civilian groups, later Pierce and Natalie, is if you don't see it, we're going to simulate it via a virtual battle system. So then that way, it doesn't take resources away from what you're doing. Because if you ran everything live, your computer would explode. That's why people's computers have been exploding, is that we tried to do too much, realistically, too much like we're actually having people fight and reload and seek cover and do some things of building that should have been virtualized. So we switched it over. We've been switching it over slowly but surely, but now it's like a lot more systems were kind of brought over to that approach, and it was the whole reason why we pushed the virtualization of units and armies outside of Cirque. I mean, that's really it in a nutshell, Derivar, for the threading we did this week. I don't know if you want to hit the next bullet point.
Yeah, I'll hit that. I'll hit it. So adding rioting dynamic groups that rebel is a zone is yellow red for too long. I mean,
Sure.
if a zone is yellow.
Yeah.
Yellow or red.
The quick notes, so you're not going to be able to read it one-to-one. So,
Yeah.
again, the patch was supposed to come out last night, but it's delayed, potentially until Monday, maybe Tuesday morning. But the patch that was going to come out essentially was going to wrap up 1.2 in terms of features. So, there's nothing new we're putting into 1.2, because at this point we need to move on to just taking the UI and just ripping it all out with the jackhammer. So that's what we're doing next week after we wrap up 1.2 in terms of the patch I was talking about Monday, and then we have a couple days of bug fixing, tweaks, balance, and then we immediately are going to jump right into 1.3 for just first thing, second thing, third thing. So what's coming in Monday-ish, and it might be sooner, but it kind of depends on if we can test it and get some work done over the weekend and some people have some free time, is basically rioting. So the idea is that when your zone enters a yellow or red status, there's a chance that it will basically enter a rioting status. What that means is basically civilians will randomly picket, yell, scream, and be like, okay, like, you're not doing anything for us. Why are you allowing these zones to deteriorate? Why aren't you, like, trying to at least keep some semblance of control? Now, that also will occur if you declare martial law for too long. So if you basically start taking away more of the people's liberties of like, oh, there's an infection event, I'm going to declare martial law. That's going to slow the rate in which the infection spreads, depending on the severity of the martial law. If you do the partial one, then it only limits it by like 50%. If you do the full one, it limits it to full potential of slowing down the tick rate to give you more time to counter the infection. So it's kind of like weighing your pros and cons in terms of, let's say for instance there's an incursion on one of your zones, you declare full martial law, everyone is to get off the streets, and then you immediately just send people in to just pacify the zone, build some walls, maybe they broke something and got in, and then you take away martial law. In that example, you'll never affect their happiness enough to actually cause them to do something with it. Basically, form a rebellion, form a dynamic civilian group in that zone that hates your guts. So the moment there's an incursion in your zone, the moment it goes yellow, You're taking negative health happiness ticks in that zone. So from the civic administration zone building, there's going to be like a happiness meter in the zone. And that happiness meter will go down by martial law, and it'll go down by not helping them, like letting the zone deteriorate until like having Chelsea come in and infect people, and then it goes to yellow, then it goes to red. So, and then once you return the zone back to green, or their idea of green, because people are going to die regardless, and martial law is taken away, then they'll start regaining happiness. They'll start, like, things will go back to normal, is the idea. If for some reason it takes longer to do that, and they do start to do rioting, we added non-lethal weapons in terms of a beanbag shotgun for a secondary weapon. So your assaults can change out their secondary pistol for a beanbag shotgun that will disperse riots. The idea behind this mechanic is that a riot will get other people riled up. It'll basically be a multiplier for how quickly they turn on you to form dynamic civilian groups. So if you ignore the riots, and you just say, screw it, I don't care about them. I'm just going to build in my little corner. I don't care what they're doing. I don't care if there's civilians being killed. I'm turtling in this corner. Well, eventually, they'll hit the point where they'll start attacking you. And so the idea is you're there for yourself. You're not there to help them, so why would they, help you? Why are they going to basically not try and raid you and steal your resources? So that would kind of be an escalation of like, okay, I'm just going to screw the civilians. Now, we also added it in so you can mark any civilian as rogue. So going ahead, if you just want to kill a civilian on the street, go ahead. It allows you to do that now. But obviously that will affect the happiness in the zone. And then that will also make civilian groups hate you on other zones because information travels in the game. So we're slowly but surely going into that direction of having a more, like, I would say a basic simulation of an infection in terms of basically like, okay, like there's Chelsea, but then there's the other factors of the civilians and how your actions and how you decide to even react to the virus will trickle down to the civilians in terms of how they're going to respond and react to you. And it's not going to be immediate. It's going to be over time. Now, when you suppress a riot, there's a cooldown for 10 minutes. So you have 10 minutes to figure out what you're going to do. Do you care or do you not care? If you care, then you would suppress a riot, they go home, and then you immediately work on pacifying, fortifying, and protecting that zone. Then you turn off martial law if you had that on, or you let the zone return back to a green status, and then they'll eventually come back out on the streets, and you won't have to worry about a rebellion. And then the ticker will tell you what's currently affecting their happiness in the zone. So it'll be like, oh, there's been an incursion of infected in this zone. Oh, you have martial law on. Turn that off, or partial or full. So that'll be coming out Monday. It may be sooner, depending on just generally how things go over the weekend. It kind of just depends. But I would kind of count for Monday or Tuesday morning, worst case. We got really close this morning, but then we ran into some issues of garbage collection and the way they were handling actor tagging for tagging actors, and we basically had to spend some time fixing bugs and fixing crashes in terms of how it was implemented, because you kind of have to, you implement something new and then you add bugs, then you add crashes, then you have to kind of work backwards sometimes when you're working on new mechanics and systems. So that's kind of came out of left field and kind of slapped us around. So we got those issues resolved, but now we need to basically get back on track in terms of getting the remainder of it. So the last aspect that'll be coming, kind of jumping ahead of myself, is the automation. So on Monday, I'll just say early next week, so I can stop saying Monday, Tuesday, is that we're going to be having the aspect of, okay, you build a civilian hold. That's great. You can view the happiness. You can view, like, you can set edicts or like like policies for that zone. But we've been talking about this for a long time, and we need to basically fulfill that. Is that you're going to basically be able to um, automate civilian intake. So you would essentially build a civic administration zone. You would say, yes, we're intaking. We're going to basically process people either for evacuation, the cages, euthanization, or just however you're trying to play. So the base idea is as a template. The template is there's three statuses of people in the game: unknown, infected, not infected. Based off of those three conditions, the game will do its best to dictate what should it do with these people that are randomly showing up for an intake. An intake's mandatory. So everyone in a zone that you set the intake will eventually show up to your gate, your little building that you place down. And then the building will scan the person and figure out of the three things, what can it do? Do you have a scanner nearby? Okay, we can determine if they're infected or not. Do you have a scientist with a hand scanner near it? Okay, we can also determine if they're infected or not. Do you not have those two things? Okay, so we're going to have to go off of unknown and unknown and not infected, because and possibly, well, actually it'd be unknown at that point, sorry. So then we'd have to go off of the unknown in terms of like, okay, what is your policy? Our default policy that we're going to put in is they go to a cage. They wait in that cage for about 8 minutes, 12 minutes to basically see if they turn. If they turn, you can farm DNA off of them, or you can shoot them. Up to you. If they don't turn, the system will automatically boot them out and send them along their way along the process of automation. So it will send them to the holding, the general hold. The general hold will essentially assign them a number. A, B, C, D, whatever. And then when their number is called, when a helicopter is ready, they will move from the general hold to the helipad to be evacuated to your carrier. Let's say, for instance, in the instance that they were infected, let's say that they turned, or they were, if you have the technology, you're able to detect that they were a carrier, which is what we're going to be adding to the DNA research tree sometime in 1.3, is that basically, if they infected, they got turned, you decide not to farm them for DNA, because you're trying to play ethically, because you can just leave them in the cage, they'll just farm your DNA every couple of ticks. So, let's say you don't do that. Then they would either be sent to the euthanization tent, or you'd have to have someone come by and shoot them. Or you could release them. The idea is that we're kind of giving you drop downs, and you just kind of choose, okay, if this fails, or if this happens, and do this and do that, and we'll have a base template for every condition, like the base, like this is the ethical way of playing. And then from there, it'll be up to each person to be like, oh, they're infected, release them to the general hold and evacuate them. I don't care. But then your aircraft carrier will start taking damage, and then eventually you'll lose your aircraft carrier. So the idea is that eventually they'll destroy it because you've evacuated too many people that are infected, and they've taken over the ship. So then you take away your one bastion of free, and the infected can't get to you. Now that will tie into the mechanic that later in 1.3 we're going to be making the aircraft carrier your winters. Basically, if the aircraft carrier dies, then you die, and winters will no longer be a lose condition. That'll be roughly around the middle to the beginning of 1.3. So we're working on the assault aircraft carrier right now. We're making changes so it's movable, and you can upgrade it. You can build units on it, and it's an actual mobile base. So that's beginning of 1.3 towards the middle. That's far off at this point. That's a month and a half, I'd guess. So let me think. That's the general gist that we're going into for Monday, and that's what we want to test. So come early next week, we'll put out the automation, we'll put out the rioting and the dynamic civilian groups that basically form rebellion groups against you if you're being a dick. and then we'll play test it for a couple more days, see if there's any bugs, see how the stability is, see how the performance is, and then if everything checks out by, say, Tuesday, Wednesday, then at that point, we're going to go in and we're going to tear out the HUD. And then we'll have something to show you guys next Saturday, hopefully, if not the following Saturday. If you guys want to see the new HUD that we're going to be doing, it's on our roadmap. So it's on our website. If you go to the website link, it's on our Discord, the training center, the roadmap link. And it's also on our game's homepage. When you first open the game and you go on the main menu, the roadmap is there as well. Because there is a full visualization of the HUD that we're going to be putting in. Barring a couple of minor changes that we're going to do to how the groups are shown to make them less invasive and easier to hide, get them completely off the goddamn screen. If you don't want to see your groups, you can just boop, and it just completely goes over and there's just an arrow there so you can bring them back over. Instead of just like, they're still there, you can see their names and just minimize. No, there's going to be a way to completely collapse the groups off the screen. Just like how the minimap is becoming transparent. And a bunch of other things. So that is in a nutshell what we're doing in there. I don't know if I'm bringing over anything, Durvar, for the automation. I think I've covered enough scenarios.
I think you've covered all of it.
Well, because it's very complicated. There's a lot of layers to it. And you figure it's going to be interesting to see what kind of pathfinding and what kind of stupid things occur in terms of the civilians or whatever getting stuck on obstacles. Because this is going to be the first time that we're going to have civilians AI that are just like moving cross zone, not cross zone, but inter zone movement. But like there's a lot of pathfinding. Because the idea behind this mechanic was to get it to the point of like, you can cordon off your camps, you can cordon off your, like, you don't have to have all your civilians in one area near the helipads. It's really hard to protect them. There's like a glob of them there. So you can have your evacuation area. You can have your holding area. You can have your cage area. And then you can have your euthanization tent area. And you can just kind of have perimeters. You can have guards. You can have, an actual intelligence setup to where it's like, oh, like the people that have been clear, they're in the holding area zone, so there's guards, and people that kind of like, there's a guard tower, there's some kind of like structure or like organization to how you're basically going about and playing. It gives players more ways of playing, in my opinion, in terms of like how they lock down the zones and whatnot strategically. So there's that, because in my example, I was recently playing Back for Blood, and I saw that like they kind of do the same thing. And so does Nero from the fucking bike game, Days Gone. Whereas like you'll come across like these little like inner segment camps where it's like, oh, it was obvious they were using this area to house the civilians, and then basically they had like the guardrails and the catwalks and the guard towers to kind of keep an eye on them until they could figure out what they were going to do with them, evacuate them, X, Y, and Z. And then I guess the positive side is that if you're going to lose a zone, it's very easy to kill everyone now. Like in 28 weeks later. Because you figure that's the other thing, is that aspect of like, well, I'm going to lose this camp. I'm not going to be able to hold it that much longer. There's still like 100 people I haven't evacuated. I'm just going to mortar the camp and pretend like nothing happened. So it kind of gives you that kind of role play, kind of like, atmosphere in terms of how you're going about playing the game. Because again, it'll let you play as a nice guy, it'll let you play as a dick, you can play somewhere in the middle, and you can kind of like change your stance of how you're playing as the game kind of evolves. Or somewhere in the middle, because I mean, sometimes they'll do bad things, sometimes they do good things, so that kind of balances out the meter sometimes in terms of like, yeah.
Yep, I've killed 1,000 civilians. Yep, I killed 1,000 civilians. Time to save a couple.
But that's the beauty of it, is that like there's always a redemption theoretically by like the happiness zone, and basically just like theoretically you could just go the route of sequestering off the zones and you're doing morally questionable things by walling them off, and people won't know about it. Because there has to be a line of communication for other civilian groups and other zones to know. So, like, if you closed off a bridge or destroyed the bridges, anyone behind the bridge that you like, let's say you're on the center part and the back bridge is the part where basically you have like your green zones and all your clean zones, whatever, and then the center treasure island is where you're doing your war crimes. The people on the back islands won't know. Their reputations won't change because they can't. There's no way for them to communicate. Is the idea, because they basically base it off of just navigation queries of like, can these people actually travel and communicate with each other? And if they can, then based off of that, we update the reputational tick of like, oh, information travels and it gets weaker over time. So where it's like, oh, this guy tells that guy, and then that guy tells this guy. So by the time it gets to the sixth person, it won't hurt your reputation as much because they're much further out and they don't believe the stories. But then if you just close it off altogether, build walls, destroy bridges, it kind of gives you some flexibility there too. Like Angel Island's a good example. Where like things you do on Angel Island will never get back to the mainland. Is a general idea. The only other thing that I neglected to mention is the boat evacuations. We're still on the fence about seeing if we can evacuate that in time. Evacuate it, if we can implement that in time. We're really anxious about getting to 1.3 sooner rather than later, so that might be something that we kind of squeeze in, maybe in 1.3 instead. Because we figure at this point we need to rip out that UI. We need to redo Winters, we need to redo we need to like finalize the operator. We need to fix some of the jank in terms of the bugs. We need to stabilize the performance. And then like little stuff like that. It's on the roadmap where like there's like 15 things that we gotta do for 1.3 to get it ready for co-op. So it's one of those things where it's like we're debating, but we're still on the fence on the importance of boat evacuations. We might push that off, and instead we might just do everything else I suggested, and then save that for 1.3 and 1.4, depending on feedback we get from the community. What else we got on the bullet point list, Demar?
We've also something else I wanted to talk about, discuss with you about concerning the rioting. Right.
Yeah.
Would we be able to arrest rioters and put them in holding cells?
No. For the time being, it'll be relegated to more of a simplistic fashion of you affect their willpower. Now, I actually missed a detail. Is that the ACS device? You know that device that like charges up and it stuns people?
Yeah.
That one also will disperse civilians. So if you build that next to a wall or next to an area where you think civilians might gather, you can charge that up from a doctrine upgrade, hit it, and it will scare everyone back home. So you don't have to worry about using a gun or switching to secondaries. I don't believe, I gotta double check, but I think the riot shield meleeing does not hurt them for their willpower. That's one of the things I have to double check on my list before we release the update. We are thinking about a gas, like a grenade launcher, like an alternate version of a grenade launcher that shoots gas canisters as a secondary, because non-lethals are going to be secondaries. You can shoot the infected with them, but it's like poking a bear. You're going to take out 1 health, and then you're going to get smacked across the fucking 2 blocks. So, would not recommend using non-lethal weapons against infected unless you have a death wish. But that's the general idea we're going in terms of how that works. So, yeah. Anyway, back to you. There am I? Are you alive?
Sorry, I had to have a discussion with...
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about
You're
that.
fine.
Okay, so where are we up to? Okay, so you've got here that Efren has been working with cats from the Discord to hunt down problematic building areas in the open world.
Yeah.
Would you be able to elaborate on that?
So we've been having Efren kind of reply, mostly Discord, because Discord is just a little easier to just have direct one-on-one communications. But we've been essentially having him just kind of talk to people on the forums on Discord and being like, oh, what kind of issues are your units running into? Because there were some issues in terms of how close some pots and planners were placed together. And some people in the community brought to our attention in terms of how the navigation builds is a lot of civilian mobs get clogged up and broken there. There were some instances where civilian mobs were leaving a structure and then they would just get pushed into a wall because the two walls, the building's door and the wall were too close to each other. So we had to kind of like get those locations, and Efren kind of went in and fixed them. And then the last thing he's been doing is kind of looking at what people have been suggesting in terms of areas they'd want to clear. So that way you can use the clearing tool to essentially like, clear more land. Remove those poles, remove these planners, and then we're looking at the performance implications as we do it. We're doing a lot of benchmarking, a lot of profiling to make sure, because every object that we add to be removable adds the game to be more expensive, because it's more individual objects that we tracked in inventory and garbage collected and all the other fun stuff. So we're very like cautious about adding too many items to the list of objects to be cleared, because everything at the end of the day has to be tracked. And the more information your computer has to track, the more expensive the game becomes. Because of RAM, CPU, not as much GPU. Rendering things is really cheap in the millions typically. Um, so yeah, that's kind of what we've been doing there. I think he earmarked like 2,000 items, 3,000 items off the top of my head that he made clearable across Treasure Island and Western Treasure Island, which is that little like region on the west side of the Central Island. So that way, like, there's just a lot more areas you could build that you couldn't build in previously. Um, Let me see. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And then that way, he's just basically, before he adds more to that list of clearing, we just need to do more testing and just make sure that we're not increasing the minimum spec that the game is required to play by doing so. Because like I said, everything we convert over is one more int view, one more, I wouldn't say draw call. Well, I guess you could say that because we use an HLOD system, so the idea is that things that aren't removable are baked together and converted into one huge object at distance. So your processor doesn't have to keep track of all the individual actors. The other thing your processor has to keep track of is the collision geo, the collision data. Um, so by switching a lot more over the dynamic, your processor now has to look at every single object in the entire game. It now can't be mass converted into one single proxy collision actor and be like, oh, can I see you? Can I see you now? What about right now? Multiplied by thousands. Which is why, as the world gets larger, well, we'll have more problems on our hands in terms of optimization. But then the engine has been getting better and better. In terms of Unreal Engine 5 opens a lot of doors for us. Nanite opened a lot of doors for us. And then there's still a lot of other techniques and approaches that we need to kind of look into that are like the procedural generation tool and a couple other things to see if we can just kind of get more out of the engine. But it's always a constant battle in terms of gameplay mechanics and features versus performance, accessibility, usability, because everyone wants to be able to clear everything in the level. But then it's like having an RTS game is a lot of overhead. So, yeah, there's a lot of moving parts and like a lot of things that go into every decision, even though it seems very minute in terms of like adding that many just clearable objects. Anyway, back to you, Durbar.
Yep. Before we get to the next bullet point, I do want to touch base on something. I've seen a few people ask questions. Please save your questions till the end of the month. That's when the proper AMA is with the rest of the team. These weekly roll-ups are just covering what's been going on through the week.
Are there any
Just
good
touch
ones
base on
though that we could, maybe like one or two?
Well, Ice Money's got two here.
I mean, we could take one every once in a while, just as long as it's not the entire thing. Because the idea is this is more of like a weekly report of our progress to the community. Because if we do questions, we'll be here for hours. But that's why we want to save those. A couple questions during the weeklies, and then pretty much 80 to 70% of the monthly is just questions. But yeah, I guess pick one real fast.
Alright, well, Ice Money asks, are we going to see options that we can use to make Sibs happy? Circ presence, evacs, pumping money into friendly factions, buildables, maybe more sub buildings for the Civ admin building.
So the idea right now is to try to keep those aspects very simple in terms of like, okay, if there's no infection going on, if you don't have martial law, then you're going to gain reputation in that zone, and you don't need to go out of your way to accommodate them. Um, we're gonna go with that for the time being, and then we're gonna see how that feels. Do people in the community, a lot of people in the community feel like we should go further down that road, and maybe having like a few distribution center. If you build that, for instance, it will like it's like a pro versus a con where you can sometimes even have martial law on, but having a few distribution center might knock like its negatives down a little bit to where it buys you a little bit more time to basically counter the infected in your zone. I don't want to go too deep into the weeds until we've kind of play tested what we have already, and then we'll reevaluate based off of like, oh, okay, people do want us to go deeper, or they don't want us to go deeper, and they want us to be more simplistic in that manner. So just keep in mind we want to see how the community reacts first to this, and then we need to finish 1.3, and then at that point, like I've been telling people on the Discord, we can have updates that are just focused on different aspects of the game without going anywhere. So there might be, like a quarter we work on just that, and another quarter where we revamp and we clean up the dynamic civilian groups to add more nuance to them. Because like there were some people that were recommending that we try and squeeze in 1.2 for having it to where you could give the civilian groups orders. You could plan how you want them to expand. You could give them missions to farm DNA for your protection. Like those kind of things. Those are all good ideas, but we need a lot more time in 1.2 to implement them. So at this point, those are things that I've earmarked, I've bookmarked, I've saved, and those are things that I want to come back to in the future and hit upon them after more of the iron of the core and the jank and the performance issues are ironed out and the co-op is live. We can just kind of go off and just focus on small little like updates that just kind of focus on those little niche parts of gameplay that will kind of enrich the overall loop and give more replay value to the game, because people can just it kind of incentivizes them to try more different ways of playing the game besides just blow everything up. But yeah, that would be my answer on that one. Anyway, back to you, Derivar.
Okay, so the next bullet point is Michael has been working on operator animations.
Yeah.
So what kind of animations has he been working on specifically?
Well, we did some dirty prototypes and sample projects of the engine to kind of figure out what we could push the operator to in terms of basically like the camera, the shooting, the moving. And we wanted to kind of be unrestricted from the RTS backbone, the code base, all that fun stuff. So we did a dirty prototype for like a couple weeks, and we figured out that we could do quite a bit more. So what he's doing is carrying over from that prototype that we did in terms of like, okay, I did the camera already. I did some of the general movements and like the how that feels, but I still need to do the crouching and the proning because we refined a lot cleaner version of crouching and proning where it's not as floaty in our dirty prototype. Um, and then realistically, he's just working on animation. There's a lot of animation work that goes into making a fluent third-person perspective. And we're looking a lot at Resident Evil 4. We're looking a lot at Division to kind of figure out like where should we draw the line in terms of quality, because we want it to be a game mode in its own in terms of when you possess an operator, it's not a tacked on looks bad, which is just an afterthought. We don't want that when it comes to the third person mode. Now I believe, based off the information of the camera, the relaxed camera, and how the shooting works, at least in third person standing, that it's starting to look a lot better. But there's a lot of things that we're going to need to ratchet up going into 1.3 in terms of the UI, crosshair, and then adding in more hit reactions and death animations so that things feel more responsive, like an actual third-person shooter is, where you shoot. And this is going to be where it gets interesting, because we're going to have to. When you're in third person and you shoot someone in the arm, they might stop and get stunned. When you're in RTS, they'll have a different subset of actions or reactions per se. That way, it doesn't become too over the top when you're playing in the RTS. And that's how we want to go at it from the get-go and see how that feels, see how the community feels about it. That also adds layers of complexity. Because when you're an operator and you're playing in third person, it's going to play like The Division or Resident Evil, where like it's responsive. But when you're playing in RTS, it's going to feel a little more bullet spongy, because enemies are just going to keep running at you. So that's what we're going to test with. That's what we're going to push out in 1.3 in terms of how we're going to do the operator, and then we'll sit back, get feedback, and see how people think about that. Because I just don't think it's a good idea to keep the RTS aspects onto the third-person shooter, and then you have people that are just bullet sponges just running at you, and there's no dynamism. There's no, like interesting quirks. So like when you play, if you shoot that guy in that one spot, he's always going to explode. Or if you shoot that girl on the leg, she's going to fall over if she's running at you from a certain speed. So like those kind of quirks makes the game feel more impactful. So that's going to be interesting. And then I've been working with him actually at the same time to associate bottlenecks in the animation blueprint and iron them out in terms of like where can we basically optimize the animation blueprint to make it less tick based and make it more event based, kind of like how Squad does their setup. If you ever look at their SDK, where it's a lot of events, it's a lot of like delegate binds instead of just a tick, and it's always checking for a bool, which is what we've done historically because it's easier to prototype. But now we've gotten to a point with the animations to where there really isn't that much that's going to change. And it really just kind of comes down to the quality of the animations that are going in. And just making sure we have really good dynamic montages to play via slots. Which is top half slot, full body slot. Which is like, if you shoot someone in the upper body, and their lower body keeps playing a run animation, but their upper body plays a jolt animation, that would be an example where like you shoot someone in the shoulder and their shoulder reacts but their legs keep moving. That would be an example in a video game of an upper body slot, because you're separating aspects of the character's bodies in the slots where you can play dynamic animations that you don't have to animate like all those things happening as if they were happening in that one moment, which is just impossible in terms of overhead. I mean, some teams can do it, but not us. So we're going more of the right route of the dynamics in terms of basically like doing the slots, doing the animation, and just kind of cutting corners there in terms of like not necessarily cutting corners, but basically just working smart with the amount of animators that we do have. Yeah, so that would be that in a nutshell for the animation. I guess I might as well talk about it since we're here about the operator. Is that there are 3 male versions and 3 female versions. I think some people here might have seen me tease the 2 male versions that we have. Then there's a 3rd male version that Michael's working on right now. And then there's 2 female versions of what we're putting in. I think it's a
The devil.
Well, it's a white guy. We have an African American, and then I forget what the 3rd one's going to be in terms of nationality for the males. And then we were going to have a white girl. There was going to be probably an Asian, and then probably either a Mexican or something else that we were going to play with. And then those would be 6 set operator aesthetics designs. And then when we get into 1.3, we'll have it to where you can choose an aesthetic and appearance, and then you can customize them to play a certain way. So we're like, that's your sniper, that's your medic, that's your assault, and that way you can kind of pick and choose abilities, and as you play with them, you'll be able to level them up, and be able to allocate skill points to kind of make this one better in certain ways. Besides just giving them a gun, you'll be able to allocate, like, oh, that one has more health, that one has more armor, that one has more resistance to infection, like that kind of stuff. That's also on our roadmap. So if you go on our roadmap, and you look at I think it's the operator card on 1.3, you'll see the full list of all the talents that we're going to be, or skill point allocations that we're going to be giving to them. So that way you can fully kind of make these operators your crack team of four or so. We're planning on four operators initially in single player, and then we'll just kind of see how that goes because we need to give them a cost for when they first come in. We need to give them a cost for when they die that it slightly increases, and then we need to take into account their level and like other things like that to make it to where they're not just like so they just don't murder everything. Because right now they're free. They've been historically free because the operators haven't been really a power force on the field. They're not. They're just kind of another assault at this point right now, and they've kind of been placeholding until we can kind of get in there and rip it all out. And the idea is we're kind of mirroring Battlefield or Call of Duty in terms of loadouts. Or it's like you can have multiple loadouts, you can have appearance associated with those loadouts, skills associated with those loadouts, skills being the skills that the classes use, and then equipment being like the flashbang and all. Well, the flashbang is actually a ability, sorry. So it'd be more so like your primary and your secondary. Um, yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell in terms of the direction we're going into for the operator. So I will try and find those pictures so I can post them in the podcast channel before we leave, so you guys can take a look at those and see what Michael's and kind of because that's really what a lot of his time is also been going into is just designing those characters and then doing the animations probably 20% of the time, 30% of the time, and then the other like 80 or 70% is in those characters. So they take a lot of time instead of designing each one, making sure they look good. Um, Anyhow, back to you, Dervar.
Okay. Just real quick. Michael just sent me a message. Do you want him to join?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, it's
Oh,
fine.
damn, we don't have a picture made for him. I'll have to turn off the overlay picture thingy. Is he like joining, or is he just gonna be here for like 5 minutes?
I don't know. He
Clarify
just sent me a
that.
message saying, ask Rob if he wants me to join.
Clarify that, so that way, because he's gonna screw up our overlay. Is the problem? I don't have it set up for 3 people yet.
Uh, you can ask him yourself. Serious.
Michael, Are you staying, or are you just coming in temporarily?
I mean, I'm staying. I'm here.
Oh God. Okay, let me just turn off the picture
You don't have
overlay.
to.
There you go. Okay, it'll have to just be like that then. I don't have a third picture thing. I can't find it right now. Anyway, okay. So let's go back to Michael. Is there anything you want to elaborate on for the operator meshes that you've been working on and the animations that you've been working on that I haven't already said?
Uh, I mean, for the most part, I mean, I'm just really working on getting as much detail out of the operator because, like, one of the key things is like when it comes to like, I would say like the detail, like obviously like the standard units are kind of cannon fodder in terms of cost. And so like the operators, I've been primarily focusing on like the small little details just because you're going to be kind of up close in their face half the time. So been working on a lot of just details on the operator. So the skin weights, I've been paying a lot more attention to like minute things with like the radio issue with the radio antenna bending with the head. In terms of like the animation stuff like that, and I guess like one of the gray areas is like what weapons will the operator have access to. So if we kind of roll back to when we were kind of prototyping the first person, we had the T36. I'm not going to go the game name. It's just G36. You guys know it as that. Um, that definitely is going to be making a comeback, but at the same time, it's going to also be making a comeback to one of the respective units. Or we might just keep it locked to the operator as just that one-off gun because it was a one-off for the operator to begin with. Kind of playing around with that. But in terms of it's going to be 3 weapons from each category to start, and then we might just, branch out more. So kind of looking into that, but for right now, it's just kind of getting those base meshes in, so you guys can go ahead and play around, get your setup, go ahead and get skills allocated. In terms of outfits and designs, we'll probably touch on that at another AMA. I don't really have much info on that.
Well, right now they're using the basic assault outfit until we basically
Yeah.
get in there and just kind of get something more uniquely designed for each one. So it's a kind of a placeholder outfit they're wearing, which is just a generic Cirque outfit.
Yeah,
And
the
you mentioned
generic
this,
assault BDU.
yeah, you mentioned this previously, but it's also a good point to hit upon is that the life expectancy of these operators should be pretty long, which is why he's kind of putting so much attention to detail into them, because these are going to be like your specialists, your like when everybody else is
Gonna be
saying
your
like
avatar to really kind of put it into perspective. Like if you played like Lord of the Rings, Battle for Middle Earth, where you made your like hero, this is kind of the same premise where this is like your alt in a sense of like, or like I guess like Command and Conquer Generals, where you had like Colonel Burton, units like that. Like what was it, Red Alert 2? You had Tyra, or what was her name? It was a girl with the dual pistols. What was her name?
I never
Uh,
actually got to play. I only ever played Red
she was
Alert 3.
OP as hell though.
2
But
was yeah.
it's kind of a sense of where it's going to be in a sense a mobile winters that you can lose and not have such a harsh penalty.
Well, money will set you back monetarily,
It will
but
set you back money wise, but like losing winters is catastrophic compared to losing an operator.
yes, and
In a
that's the
sense, once you gear up your operator and level it up, it would probably be more useful than winters at that point.
well, it will be because
Tayana, or Tanya, there we go. Thank you. Somebody said it's Tanya. Yeah, Tanya was.
yeah, but that would be the general idea is that these are gonna be like your I mean, they're going to be your units that you kind of trust to kind of push out on the front line, lead teams, whether you run them all on a crack Alpha or Bravo team or whatever, or you break them up between like your normal grunts. And we want to go in the direction of having it to where these units can boost morale. And the same thing we want to eventually test with Winters 1.3. When we make the aircraft carrier change, we're going to have to give her some more utility. One of the things that we were talking about is having it to where like she could basically like boost the XP gain of units around her, or she would like improve the effectiveness of those units around her somehow. It was just one of those things that we were kind of looking at the weapon stats and just kind of figuring out what we could manipulate in a radius around her to make it to where like okay like these units are really good as leaders to bring around and just kind of inspire your units. We were definitely going to do the XP gain. I think we were talking about fire rate. We were also talking about, like, God, what was it? It wasn't damage, but it's just
I
one of
think it
those
would be
things.
like target acquisition and XP gain. I feel like
Target
those
acquisition
would be
rate.
like
That's what
two
it
good
was.
starting points, and then we can kind of play around. Like once we kind of polish and kind of expand the operator tree, we'll have more weapon configurations that we can kind of play with because the weapons are going to have to be re-imported into a game to fit the customization for the operator. So that allows more configure, like variables that we can manipulate with like I would say like boost that being around that set unit could do. Or for like for instance, we could have like uh just because of the overhead is like if you think of like World War Z where you had like the M4 and then you had the higher tier M4, if you think about like how the levels work currently for the assault, if they had like let's say they're level 5 of an M4, it just kind of automatically just put like the top attachments for the M4 on there. Like we could play around with ideas like that. It's more of just stuff that we're kind of getting up to and gearing towards to kind of flesh out the operator to where it's just done.
Yes. And one of the things I was going to put in there is that we're going to be playing around with the attachments. So we're going to basically, that's another reason why we're limiting the amount of weapons that are going in for the operator initially, is that we're going to be having it to where you can kind of fine tune how the weapon performs via the attachments. So we'll add in like simple ones like they increase your critical, they increase your magazine size, they make your gun quiet so it doesn't generate noise like the suppressor. And then
Yeah,
from there,
recoil control, crit damage. I think we're gonna leave crit chance set as that would it kind of breaks things very easily. A lot of the assault rifles, I think, are their base is like 10% crit chance, and assault rifles are like 20.
yes,
In terms of underbarrels, I saw someone say like an M4 with a flamethrower. We were kind of debating like what kind of underbarrel attachments we were going to go with. Most of them, I'm going to say now, are going to be angled grips. In terms of like having M203s, maybe when we get later down the line to like kind of figure out the best way of changing that because that's more of a complication on the animation side of things of fixing the hand position to determine, oh, don't hold it this way, hold it this way for that one one-off, and I think it might just be easier to that would just be a one-off weapon that had an underbarrel. It might just be easier to kind of flesh out that way. But we'll when we get there, we get there.
Yes. So, I mean, that's the operator in a nutshell. In terms of basically, there's a lot going on there. That will probably like a week from a programming standpoint to get it to where it needs to be. V and Derek are basically tag teaming, getting the operator UI in, and just kind of getting the skill tree. Because some of the skill tree stuff has actually been done. It's just a matter of just there's a lot of moving parts that are going on right now. So we need to get the UI done. We need to get skinned. We need to double check our code for the skill tree stuff to make sure it's all working and nothing's broken for the modifier stacks that we did add in. And then from there, it's just a matter of getting it out to you guys so you can playtest it.
But we
Um,
also have to fix the operator screen on the main menu.
oh yeah, that's what I meant by UI. There's a lot of moving, like introducing a new mechanic to the game. There's a lot of overhead. Um, that's the other thing I forgot to mention previously. Keep in mind that for the automation and the evacuation, the cleanse operations, the condemning operations, the helipad operations, the holding station area, we're going to be getting ambient dialogue recorded that's going to populate the world. So, like, let's say, for instance, you have like a cleanse operation going on, where like you're eradicating everyone inside of a building. It'll start playing propaganda from nearby buildings saying like, "Oh, Circus currently in operation of clearing out a building that's infected. Please stay home. Don't leave your homes, whatever." And then if you build a civilian hold, a civic administration zone, and you don't, it'll also play random dialogue in a zone. Where the idea would be is it'll tell people to stay inside and don't come outside if you don't build one and you're in a zone. But if you do build one, it'll say more friendly dialogue if intake mode is on. But it would be like, oh, like, please report to your nearby circ center. Once you've come to a circ center, you cannot leave. Please have your ticket. Blah blah blah, like that kind of stuff. Where the idea is that we're going to start roughly next week. I'm gonna look at getting some voice actors online to do some protesting chants and to do the loudspeaker announcements so then that way you guys can have a lot more ambience and the things that you're doing in the game, how you're playing in the game, will actually be depicted in the game in an audio format. So it's kind of like, oh, okay, like I'm literally doing evacuations. Now the holding center is going to be saying out dialogue 24/7 in terms of what their rules are, what they need to be doing, how they need to follow them. And there's like a dozen or so lines that we have recorded for every type of status going on in the world, whether it be cleanse, whether it be condemn, whether it be they're at a civilian hole, whether it be their evacuation is actually the only one that's quiet. We decided to make no dialogue for the helipads themselves, and just leave it quiet and eerie. And then the other one would be the civic administration zone, and then we kind of went with the idea there are like loudspeakers around around the city, so it'll be like the World War II, kind of like nuclear alarms, whatever, where it's like just loudspeakers being played off of buildings across the zone that you can hear as you're moving your camera around. Um, so that will go out for recording sometime early. I'll say actually, let me rephrase that. That will go out for recording sometime late next week. I'll be doing some casting for VO actors sometime in the middle of the week to the beginning. Once I have like I think you're secured 3 or more voice actors. Once those are secured, then basically I'll get those recorded, and then we'll probably have it into the game by like I would say around the first, so maybe a little bit after. I would probably say the sometime the week of the first of next month. So, because our goal is just again we need to get to 1.3 yesterday, so we need to ratchet up this automation, get the rating and all that stuff in there, find the writing in there, bug test it, get it feature complete in terms of it's in there, and then immediately move on to tearing out the HUD. Because like literally, if I have my way and everything's working and everything's functional and there's not that many bugs going into next week, early next week, we're gonna start ripping out the HUD by Wednesday, Thursday. If no one comes back on by then, they're like, "Oh my God, it's on fire! You guys have broke or something." I don't know. So it'll be on experimental first, Monday-ish, and then we'll give it a couple of days. We'll put some announcements out and let people know, please go in and break it. Like, show us the issues. And then Wednesday rolls around. If it's the all clear, we immediately start ripping out the HUD. And just literally plan to have a build, if not Friday night with the new HUD, the following week. Because the thing is that we're going to start hitting that 1.3 really fast. Most of those cards are like, some of the cards on 1.3 are a day or two. Some of the cards on 1.3 is a week. Some of them are 2 weeks. So it kind of comes down to like, we're going to try and hit all the easy stuff almost immediately. So, and that's like the really like quick quality of life stuff, like the UI, like the operator changes, like the stationary turret for anti-air, the mobile guard tower. To give you an example, the stationary turret and the mobile guard tower will probably take us 2 hours. They're already modeled, they're already animated. We just got to program them and make sure they're working right and all their hitboxes are set up. So like that would be an example of something that we'll just get out in the first couple of weeks of next month. So it's going to be a very, very crazy August. There's gonna be a lot of things going on in August in terms of basically like the whole game's gonna be basically reinvented again because it's gonna be a whole new spec and shine in terms of like the how it looks visually, how it plays again. Because now it's not winter, it's not all on winters anymore. Because ideally, if I pull up the roadmap right now, I'll just pull it up before we go back to that bullet point. I'll link it in the channel so people know what I'm talking about. So I put it in the chat on YouTube, and then I put it in the chat in the podcast channel. And so, like, let's say we're looking at 1.3 for the revised UIs, HUDs. That'll take us a week. D-Day research tree, we're just waiting for the UI. That'll probably take us 3 days or so. Shift to order multiple tasks. That's probably a day. The guard tower and the Avenger turret, that's a couple hours. The operator finalization, that's a week. The minimap revamp, that's going to probably be a week. Because we're going to have to sit down with you guys and figure out, okay, this is what we think how the minimap should look. What do you guys think in terms of like the approach we're going in? And that'll be a back and forth on experimental for a good week next month. The buildings and the placing structures, that's going to be the same thing. Well, we're going to go in probably maybe 3 to 4 days, hopefully. And that's going to be, we go in, we do what we think is enough. We've tested as much as we humanly can with the limited team we have. We'll put it out on experimental, and we'll be like, hey, go break the building system. Tell us hedge cases where you can't place walls where it would make sense that you can. Tell us examples of where, like, you want to place structures, that like that kind of stuff. Like, why can't you place down this barracks here? That kind of stuff. And we might look into like, adjusting the landscape there, but it'll most likely be mostly just improving the traces and giving more visual feedback. Doctrine Circ Polish, that's going to be, I don't have an ETA for that one. Because that's going to be the VTOL, that's going to be the Bradley, that's going to be the Abrams, that's going to be the helicopter weapon packages. So Doctrine Circ Polish, that could bleed over a couple weeks. That's one of the things that we're going to be waiting to save at the end. The aircraft carrier and the Winter's gameplay change, we started on that before we did the Doctrine and the Circ Polish. That's already being worked on right now. We expect the aircraft carrier to be done in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So by the time we get to that, then the person that's working on that will be working on the Abrams, the Bradley, and all the other fun stuff, so we can get a queue going for basically getting the Doctrine Circ Polish situated. Based off of time, we'll probably at this point have him do the helicopters and Little Bird weapons, and then go do the Abrams, the VTOL, and the Bradley, because those take a long time. There's a lot of moving parts. The infected AI improvements and the lieutenant improvements, we're probably looking at least 2 to 3 weeks. So our goal, that's our general like idea. It might be a month for the infected AI improvements, because they need to be intelligent, where they actually make you sweat. In terms of like, when you see a lieutenant It's not like, oh, it's that one guy with the gun. Oh, it's that one guy with the gun. He's gonna kill everyone. So you actually have to. Everyone's an actual threat, and it's not just they're gonna bug out. They're gonna run into that wall. They're going to teleport around sometimes, like they're in Dragon Ball Z. So, like, that's kind of a quick drive-by breakdown. There's one more thing that's not on this list. That's basically gas, which is basically we'll be converting over before we do co-op. One of the preliminary things that we have to do is to convert the entire game over to gas. It's basically like gameplay ability systems. So like it's a more like sophisticated way of doing unit abilities and attributes for a game that's already replicated and co-op and multiplayer supported from the get-go, and it makes adding new content to the game quicker and easy. So if like Michael wants to go make a new ability, it's very easy for him to do that. It's a system that Fortnite, the new Revenant game that came out on Saturday, uses, or the early access did. Like a lot of Unreal games utilize gas, and it's something that we've needed to do and convert the entire project over. So that's like when we're at gas. The idea would be that like we're doing it either preemptively before the co-op, like way before the co-op, or we're doing it right before the co-op, regardless on the roadmap. So if you hear me saying gas, it's not what you think it is. It's an actual framework built into the Unreal Engine. So that'd be a basic rundown of what we're going to be doing going into next month. What I would say is that there's one thing that's not on the revised HUD and UI that we're going to be doing regardless, is that we're going to be adding in a weapon damage graph that basically shows damage over time, because Michael and I actually have damage over time in the game, like in Battlefield or Call of Duty. But the damage numbers in the game don't represent that, so nobody ever knows why their units are doing less damage or why this weapon is balanced in the way it is, because it's a damage fall-off graph for every weapon in the game. So we'll be adding that, so when you buy a weapon, it'll actually have like statistics and data about the weapon, so you can make more meaningful tactical choices in terms of like, oh, that's why I'd want this gun, because it's really good at, like keeping its damage fall off. Its damage fall off is like, not as steep per se. Scar versus the M4, as an example. So those are all mechanics and systems in the game that make the gunplay very deep, but nobody knows, because we don't do a good job visualizing that. So that's something that we're going to be squeezing into revised HUD and UI. The moment we start that, it's going to be on the list for the gameplay changes. And then the other thing that I'm going to be pushing for is kind of like a War Games Red Dragon approach to unit targeting, where if you click on someone and then you highlight over an enemy, it will draw a line and it will show you how close you need to get to actually hurt someone, and it will show you like if one weapon can hurt them, what weapons can't. So we'll draw different colors or different circles to basically show like, oh, if the Apache can, the missile pods fire this far, but then the gun that's but the Apache's main gun, like its chain gun, whatever it's called, can only go this far. So that way you have more meaningful information in terms of like, why isn't my striker firing? Because I run into that situation quite often myself, where I'm playing the game and I tell a unit to shoot something, and then he shoots someone else instead. And it's because that unit, if they don't listen to you, it's because that unit's out of their line of sight. And then they fall back on their defense logic to make sure they don't die. But that needs to be visualized to the player, so then that way they can make better tactical decisions in terms of like, oh, I need to move closer, or I know how close I need to get from just where they are, and then highlighting someone to know what the engagement distances are. And that's something I kind of want to do for the spinners and stuff like that as well, where when you highlight them, if they have a ranged attack, it'll kind of show you like when you're going to enter their range. Because that's another thing that's almost impossible to tell sometimes in our game, is you don't know the limitations of units. So that's another aspect that I'm going to be personally pushing for sometime in the revised UI section, to just kind of iron that out to get better feedback to our players. I think that's pretty much it for just kind of giving a quick drive-by. I'm pretty sure I'll end up doing it again next month. Sorry, next week in the bigger AMA for running through the roadmap, because next week we will definitely be on Saturday at the point of like really, really close to 1.3, if not already have started ripping out the UI, as long as you guys don't find any catastrophic bugs in our experimental build coming up next week. Anything else you two want to add?
Nothing I can think of.
Excellent. What about you, Michael? Okay, do we have anything else on the bullet point to go over before we take maybe a couple questions and wrap it up?
You've written down fix some issues with civilian evacuations. Some were put on hold for the new automation system.
Oh yeah, so there were a couple of forums threads. Just people know we don't ignore you. We saw the issues that you were running into, but there was no issue, there was no point for us to fix it, because in literally 3 days we're ripping out the entire system and redoing it. With what I described is coming out soon, like early next week. So if you're listening, the cats that are on the Discord channel, when Derek posted that basically some of them are on hold, it's because of this. It's because basically we're going to have to fix them in a different way for what we're pushing out early next week. So it shouldn't be there anymore. If it is, tag us and we'll fix it early next week. Other than that, though, I think that's pretty much it. I don't really have anything else. Are there any notable questions you guys want to pull from the audience when we wrap it up?
Let me check YouTube.
I don't think there's anything in Discord.
Are there plans for new special infected mutations?
Yes, but they're on hold for the time being. We're planning on a whale for a transport unit, and we're planning on an elite guard unit for Chelsea, and then we're planning on a chimera dog. That's kind of like the White Walkers from, not White Walkers, fucking the spike creatures from Tomorrow War, something along those lines. Something that can run really fast and go head to head with Cirque's heavily armored like fast units like the Abrams. The Abrams can go fast, but more so like the Strikers. Something that can climb, and it's like a more bulkier version of the Spinner, but not as slow as a Juggernaut. Because the Juggernaut's kind of a baboon right now, in terms of like he's just really lumbering and slow.
Runs like a gorilla.
He runs like a gorilla. But if Michael and I have our way, we're gonna re-mocap that. So it comes down to basically eventually the Juggernaut's animation movement will change to not be as gorilla-ish. And that's kind of why I was saying earlier, some of the things in 1.3 I don't have an ETA on. Like the AI, like we're going to have a profiling debugging session for each AI until they're just done. So like there's going to be a week where we just go with the Juggernaut. We're not done until he doesn't bug out on walls anymore, until he makes the correct tactical decisions in terms of basically how he should go about fighting your little birds, your aerial units, your clusters, who he should target, and how he's able to be, and making sure he can't be kited very easily. So that's an example where it's basically like that's why I said earlier for the AI that it could be 2 weeks, it could be a month, it could be a little bit longer, because it'll like Leviathan. I don't know if you guys look at the screenshots channel, but that guy can fly sometimes. That's a bug. Or sometimes somehow there's a situation that allows the Leviathan to actually go above ground and burrow above ground. So it's like little stuff like that where like we're going to be going into every old system and just tearing it all out, redoing it in some cases, and making more of a dedicated AI director, where it's more meticulous in terms of like when units are sent your way, it's more planned out. Instead of just, oh look, the Cirque's over there, let's just send 5 guys. Okay, let's send 20 guys. So those are all things that we're looking at for going into next month, into the month after that. But yeah, it's going to be, ideally, if everything goes to plan, we're trying to get something playable for co-op in October, but that's like the rough idea. Because you figure I expect September going into October to be Doctrines, and I expect probably August and September, to be like, let me rephrase that. September, August, October is going to be Doctrines, and it's going to be a lot of the AI, and then that might make us bleed over. because I don't want to move on to co-op until they're both solidified and they're fully functional and they're an actual challenge in a single-player environment. Because some people will just roll over the AI as they stand right now. So like it'll just be too easy at that point. It'd be great for logistics and teamwork, but I want to keep the difficulty. I want to keep it to where the game is soul crushing when it comes down to it. In terms of like one mistake, you're done for a good 10 to 15 minutes. You go back, lick your wounds, and recover basically. In some cases, if you didn't have redundancies in place. Um, so I think that pretty much sums it up. Duravar, you want to go ahead and give the outro?
Yeah, I can do that. All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming along and asking questions and sitting here and listening to how we've been doing throughout the week. If you'd like to support development further, we do have a Patreon as well as a I've forgotten merch store. We also have I think it's one currently, isn't it? One
No,
DLC
it's
at the release.
no. Well, don't call them DLCs. We're not going to call them DLCs. It's basically we have 3 optional support packs. If you want to, you're welcome to check it out on the Steam store. They go towards helping speeding up development because they allow us to bring on more engineers and allow our engineers to basically not work as much as their part-time jobs and work more on the game. Because I don't know about you guys, but we take a long time sometimes, and that I'm trying to speed that up. So it's an optional way that if you do want to, maybe look into one of those options. Maybe just get one of the DLCs for the chemos. There's a NATO one, a modern one, and then there's a classic wars pack. So it's on the Steam store. There's a bundle. So if you get the bundle, you get like 10% off or something like that. If you just buy them all together, and if we, the beauty of it is I set it up so it's not like the FOMO crap. So if you bought some of them previously, and then we release the other 2 later on, you still get the discounts as if you had bought all the other 1 or 2 at the same time as the other one. So yeah, it's set up in that way, so it's like, oh look, like we're not trying to be money grubbing. It's just there. People want to help us. So let's keep in mind of that. It's on the Steam store page. Back to you, Dervar.
I think that's it. I think
Okay.
that's all the outro, isn't it?
So thank you guys for coming. Going ahead, next week will be 5 o'clock, 5 p.m. PST. Next month will be the big one. In terms of basically, it'll be the full month review. We'll be taking questions for at least 30 minutes minimum. And we hope to see a lot of you guys there. We'll be taking questions from YouTube and from Discord. So if you can't come from the Discord, feel free to drop your questions in YouTube, and we'll do our best to just pick out some and balance out the 2. Yep, you guys have a good weekend.